I'm Ryan.
And I'm Brett.
And welcome to the question at hand. Minisode, or something. We haven't exactly come up with a name for it yet, but it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
What's up, guys, and welcome back to the question at hand. Hope everybody's doing absolutely phenomenal. And tonight, it is just me and Brett, and we have a little mini-sode for you, which who knows how long that this will go. We really don't know. But this will be just a bonus episode. Brett brought up that we should probably discuss the war that is going on between Russia and Ukraine at the moment, because there's probably a good chance that, we have some kind of kickback from what's going on in that part of the world. And Brett, being a history professor, it's right up his alley.
Yeah.
And I know you've kept up with it more. I don't know a whole lot about what's going on. I mean, I've seen it on the news, I guess, like when you go to lunch or just like on a news app or something.
Yeah.
For weeks now, maybe even a couple months, depending on how long it's actually been going on. But it's been a while.
Yeah, I feel like to maybe the average person, this whole war and things going on the last few months may have felt like it came out of nowhere, but there is a lot of backstory to it and historical context that needs to be understood to, if you're wondering why this is happening now and, all the things that are going on outside of even Ukraine related to this conflict and some of the ramifications that are going to be going on as a result. So I think it'd be a really interesting topic to talk about from lots of different points of view.
Yeah, for sure. And I know I've seen, I don't know how much you're on like TikTok, if you are at all, but there's been lots of videos on TikTok of what appears to be videos from maybe like Russian military. There's some from Ukrainian civilians as well as military. I saw one earlier that was talking about, which I don't know. I haven't actually done any research to know if this is true. I saw it on TikTok, so I'm going to tell you about it because I just saw it like half an hour ago. But there was an island off the coast of Ukraine, and they had 13 military there to, defend like the Ukrainian island.
Mm-hmm.
And a Russian warship rolls up and, gives them their call and says, surrender or we're going to bomb you. And they essentially say, Russian warship, go fuck yourself.
Yeah. That I've seen that story. So I'm going to say it's probably true. And that sounds like something that would really go on. But yeah, I feel like there was a lot of people that didn't think that Ukraine would put up the kind of fight that they're doing. I think that's what Putin thought also.
Yeah. Well, when it first started going around on the news, I'm like, I don't understand what's going on because it was just like a headline or something. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't understand like why Russia is attacking Ukraine. And I think my dad or somebody was like, yeah, I'm not even sure that Ukraine has like a well-established enough military to be able to defend themselves.
Yeah. So, if you'd like, I can go ahead and get into it. So I think where this all needs to start is back in 1991. That was whenever the Soviet Union dissolved. And Ukraine used to be a part of the Soviet Union. So Russia and Ukraine were part of the same country.
Yeah.
And Ukraine has always been a very vital part of the Soviet Union, and then just in Eastern Europe now, because that is where a ton of grain is grown for all of Europe. One of the things that they refer to is Ukraine it's the breadbasket of Europe. That's where everything is grown because they have such fertile soil there. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine became its own country. And, going forward, pretty much all of Eastern Europe after the collapse of the USSR started to move more and more closer to the West as far as their political leanings and their military relationships with Western European countries, and specifically NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, this has all been really unfortunate, at least if you're looking at this from the Russian perspective, because what they view this as is whenever Ukraine and all these other former countries that were part of the Soviet Union, or at least in the Soviet bloc, whenever they're moving closer and closer to ties with the West, they look at that as a threat.
Yeah.
Because, now that the Cold War is over, at least from their perspective, they thought that NATO should no longer exist. Now that all these other countries are starting to join NATO and, again, move their ties closer to the West, Putin has really taken that personally, especially in terms of how Russia does its trade with the rest of Western Europe, and also how isolated they are starting to become on a national scale or on a worldwide scale.
Yeah.
So, again, back in 1991, Ukraine becomes independent. And ever since then, Ukraine has been attempting to join NATO. Now,
And NATO is the North Atlantic Trade Organization. Is that correct?
It's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Treaty Organization.
And NATO was actually something that was formed back in 1949. It was originally just a bunch of Western European countries and the United States and Canada. And it was just a mutual defense pact that was supposed to oppose any military buildup of the Soviet Union. So if the Soviets were to attack any of these countries that had signed this treaty, it would be considered an attack on all of them, and therefore all of them would join together to counterattack. Throughout its history, ever since 1949, there's been several instances of other countries joining, even countries that are not in Europe. For example, Turkey, which is mostly an Asian country, and Middle Eastern, I guess if you want to put it that way, they joined back in the 1950s. And again, all these other countries that used to be part of the Soviet sphere of influence, including ones that were part of the Soviet Union, countries like Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, they have also joined NATO. And again, all in the last few years. Now, Putin, again, he's not liking seeing all this going on, because he honestly sees this almost like former parts of his country are now his enemy.
Yeah.
And
he wants to unite everyone and bring them back to become a Soviet Union.
It's basically what it's looking like.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why he has almost looked at the Ukraine as the last straw in a lot of cases, because the Ukraine did used to be part of the Soviet Union. And since they had not joined NATO yet, even though they were on the pathway to join NATO, he probably thought that this was now or never. Either now we are going to take them over and reincorporate them back into Russia, okay, or the Russian Empire, Soviet Union, whatever you want to call it. If they don't do it now, then maybe in a year or only a couple of years, then the Ukraine would have joined NATO. And then if they were to do any attacking at that point, then they'd have to deal with the United States and all these other countries, which that's not something that he wanted to deal with.
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of the things that you're seeing right now is the Ukraine has kind of been left on their own in this conflict because since they're not a NATO member, they don't get any direct military assistance from the rest of NATO.
Yeah.
And I understand that there's probably some folks out there that are wondering why the United States hasn't stepped in to send our military in. Well, it's because, first of all, we don't really want to get involved in a European conflict that we don't have to.
Yeah.
And again, we don't have any long-standing military relationship with the Ukraine since they're not a NATO member.
Yeah. So basically the U.S., if we were to step in, is just causing more conflict than it should, because really we're not involved at all.
The other thing that you have to think about as well is Russia is a nuclear power.
Yeah.
And the Ukraine is not. And if the United States or really any other nuclear power was to get involved, then you have that on the table, which nobody wants, but it could be possible. The ironic thing is, whenever the Soviet Union collapsed back in 1991, most of the Soviet stockpile of nuclear weapons was in the Ukraine.
Oh, really?
But whenever they became independent, the Ukrainian government at the time decided to ship off all of their nuclear weapons back to Russia so that they could dismantle them, or again, just so that the Ukraine wouldn't be considered a nuclear power.
Yeah.
They thought it was more trouble than what it was worth to keep them. So it's kind of ironic now looking at it that if they would have kept their nuclear weapons, maybe this never would have happened.
Yeah, they would have posed more of a threat with the nukes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Dang, that's crazy.
Also, something that's been in the news lately is, and again, need some historical context for this, but the nuclear accident that's become super famous, the Chernobyl accident. Chernobyl is actually in the northern part of Ukraine, and that's one of the places that the Russian army took over first whenever they invaded just in the last couple of days. So they've claimed that was all because they didn't want any Ukrainian terrorists to set off any kind of explosion there that would spread radiation, but I don't know if that's really what's really happening there. The real reason why they took over that.
I mean, I've seen pictures of the aftermath, I guess, of Chernobyl, which is just a terrible situation all ways around. Yeah. But would there be anything still there that would be worth setting off?
See, that's what I was under the impression that Chernobyl has already been, I mean, as far as a nuclear reactor, it's already been shut down or basically destroyed from the accident. They had to do some kind of a containment thing because all the radiation that spread after that explosion.
Yeah.
But I don't understand the importance of it, at least in 2022 terms. But nonetheless, they still took it over. So now, the other thing that's become really shaky is kind of what the international response has been to this conflict. Obviously, most of the Western European countries, including NATO members, the United States, Canada, almost the entire world has condemned this invasion by Russia. Yeah. But there has been some notable exceptions to countries that have not condemned this. And one of them is...
Are they supporting it, or they're just like, okay, yeah, it's not our place to say this is a bad idea?
That's really what it is. It's not necessarily that they are supporting Russia in this. It's not like, again, they're not sending any kind of military aid to Russia for this, but they're not condemning this, which basically means that they're okay with it. Countries that are on that list include China, who is probably the United States' biggest adversary, at least as far as from a military perspective now.
Yeah.
Also, India has not condemned this invasion yet.
Huh. That's interesting.
And that one I found a little bit odd because we have pretty close ties with India.
Yeah.
But again, I think part of that is because India does have a lot of they have a pretty big trade relationship with Russia. So if they were to condemn it, then they would basically be cutting off a lot of their trade.
Yeah.
And diplomacy and things like that. So that's probably the reason why. But India is a very populous and powerful country itself. And for them not to condemn this, I think that says a lot. But
yeah, I mean, they have 1 billion plus people.
Oh, yeah. They're the second most populous country right behind China. Mm-hmm. But I think they're projected, as far as their population growth is going right now, to become the most populous country on the planet within like the next decade, I think.
That's crazy.
So
How do you fit
yeah,
that many people in India?
I don't know. It's
I mean, when you look at land mass over there, India isn't exactly the largest,
I mean,
especially when
it's-
you compare it to China.
Yeah.
China's enormous.
Yeah, India, even though it's still a big country, it's not the same size as China or the United States or obviously Russia. So it's kind of crazy how
Yeah.
packed in those people must be.
Yeah. That seems crazy to have that many people in such a small space.
Now, one of the things that has been pointed out is that the response to this invasion of Ukraine by Russia can also be seen as parallels to other things that are going on elsewhere in the world.
Okay.
And a lot of people are using this as how are countries going to respond to these other things if similar situations were to happen. The main one that people are looking at is how China deals with Taiwan.
Okay.
So Taiwan, back whenever the Chinese had their civil war, the nationalists, who were the main opponent to the Communist Party,
Yeah.
they fled to the island of Taiwan, and they've been there ever since. Essentially, Taiwan has operated almost like their own country for the past 70 years. But the mainland China, which is communist China, still claims Taiwan as part of their territory. So the reason why that becomes really big, at least in the context of this Russian invasion of Ukraine, is it's almost the same thing. Russia sees Ukraine as part of its territory, essentially. That's why they're taking it. So if there isn't some kind of a major response to this Russian invasion of Ukraine by the United States or really any other powerful country, then what's stopping China from going and doing the same thing with Taiwan?
Yeah.
So that's really one of the reasons why there does need to be some kind of a firm response from the West. But again, you have to always balance this with, well, what do we need to do militarily without us getting fully involved? I know that there's probably
there's been a lot of calls for us to do something.
Yes. And as far as the last time I checked, which was only like a few hours ago, we are sending a lot of military aid, equipment and things like that, but no soldiers at this time. Again, if we were to get directly involved with Russia, that could escalate things to a point that nobody really wants to see.
Yeah.
But again, in the context of what's going on over in China, if we don't have any kind of military response, then again, it's a little bit different over in Asia because there's the only really big allies that we have over there is South Korea and Japan. And if something was to go down there, China is a much more powerful military than Russia is as far as their numbers, and their technology is, quite frankly, getting to where they're a lot more powerful than Russia as well.
Yeah.
So the only thing that really is keeping Taiwan safe right now is the fact that they're an island.
Yeah. Well, and like with China, I mean, what we're able to see for technology is superior to Russia.
Yeah.
But who knows what we don't know about?
And that's the thing. The unknown factor is kind of what's scary.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I saw, and this is kind of interesting, I don't know if you could speak to this a little bit better than me, but there's an online group called Anonymous. Have you ever heard of Anonymous?
It's like QAnon. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's kind of like that. They have declared cyber war.
I heard that
on Russia.
Yeah.
So I guess they're trying to hack into, I guess, the military aspects of what Russia has and things like that. So that's kind of interesting.
I did hear about that. I think they put out some kind of like one of those videos with someone sitting in a chair with a mask and they're, they have like the dubbed over voice that's or it's got like so many effects on it that it sounds like
Yeah.
I did see something about that, which that's really interesting, because there are people out there that have the ability to hack government organizations,
Yeah.
and probably choose not to do it most of the time just because they don't have a reason to.
Yeah.
But I mean, when you look at the number of things that are controlled by the internet, and I mean, I guess you could just say the internet for the most part. It's astounding, like how many things that you could potentially hack. Like you could, like nowadays, you could literally hack someone's refrigerator if you wanted to, which seems ridiculous. Like, what reason do you have to hack a refrigerator? But you could literally hack someone's refrigerator
because you can. That's why.
and so I mean, a lot of those guys, if that were a thing, I mean, you get nuclear launch codes. You're able to have basically a god's eye of everything that Russia is doing, because you can see all of their surveillance. You have taps on any kind of communication that they have. It's pretty crazy, and it's interesting to see how the military has combated that, because I mean that's been a threat now for a while. I don't know if they have some kind of alternative forms of communication that isn't all through like internet stuff that could be hacked. But I mean, most of that stuff is probably close to something that could be hacked. And then if it has a microphone or a speaker or something, like you could pick up on anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting that they declared cyber war on Russia, because I mean, I've never been to Russia. I don't exactly know how their infrastructure works, but I know if someone were to hack the US, like I think even Biden said something about it because he's old and doesn't know how to speak clearly most of the time. I mean, that's just like a fact. Like, it doesn't matter what political side that you stand on. If you watch the guy speak, he doesn't know where he is most of the time, I don't think.
He loses his train of thought.
Yeah,
he relies very heavily on the teleprompter.
And I'm pretty sure that it came out like he told, I think it was Putin in a meeting, like if you were to hack like these several like infrastructure pieces in the US, it would basically shut down the entire country. And I would assume Russia probably has something similar to that.
Yeah. I mean, power grid, internet, different things like that, we'd be screwed. But it is interesting seeing, just groups like that aren't even part of a country necessarily. They're probably, I don't even know if you could call them multinational. They're just an organization. I don't even know if you can call it an organization. They're anonymous. So we don't really know a whole lot about them.
Well, and I'm not even sure that the people in Anonymous know who each other are.
That's probably right.
I mean, they're hackers, so they probably have done their digging and tried to find out, but most of those guys are able to cover their tracks well enough that there may be no trace of anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure it's a collection of people from all over the world just because of the way that the internet works.
Yeah.
But I mean, I really have no idea of I have no idea of the level that these guys are able to hack, because it is well beyond my understanding of computers and stuff like that. So
if it's well beyond yours, you can imagine how well beyond it is for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here just listening. I'm not a history guy. I will say that. I've never really been super interested in history. I could talk your ear off about equipment and microphones and video cameras and all this other random stuff that I'm into, but I've just never really been super into history. Like, I know that you said Soviet Union, Ukraine used to be a part of it, Lithuania, Estonia,
Latvia. Those were countries
those the only ones, or are there others as well?
Those countries were a part of the Soviet Union back before it collapsed. Now, there are other countries that were not part of the Soviet Union, but were within what was called the Warsaw Pact. That was
Yeah.
essentially the Soviet Union's version of NATO. It was a mutual defense pact. So countries like that have now joined NATO are Poland, uh, Hungary.
You need a snack?
Do I need a snack?
You said hungry. I was just
Hungry,
looking at it.
yeah.
Just try to lighten the mood.
Yeah. I mean, there's other ones as well. I can't think of them off the top of my head right
Yeah.
now. But if you're looking at this from Putin's point of view, he sees his sphere of influence shrinking
Mhm.
slowly but surely. And most of these countries that have since joined NATO after being within the Soviet sphere of influence, that has all happened within the time that Putin has been in office. So it's not like this is
Which has
not.
been a while, hasn't
Yeah,
it? It
yeah.
feels like he's been in there forever.
He's changed a lot of things to stay in power as long as
Yeah.
he has, because he was democratically elected back in 2000. So he's been in office even before
Wow.
George W. Bush took office. So,
Yeah.
Um,
Dang, that's crazy.
but I could go into Russian politics, but I'm not going to. But
Yeah.
essentially, he's changed a lot of things to stay in power as long as he has. Now, the thing that really, at least in the modern times, started this conflict is the Ukraine back over in the, I guess it'd be the eastern part of the country.
Mhm.
There is a lot of native Russian speakers there. And he believes that those Russian speakers need to be back
Part
in
part of Russia.
part
Yeah.
of Russia. Now that's
So
kind of
would those be those Russian speakers in Ukraine? Would those be native Ukrainians, or would that be migrants who have come from Russia?
so those were people that are still living in Ukraine,
Yeah.
that are from Ukraine. That, I mean, they are Ukrainian citizens,
Yeah.
but they have a lot more leanings towards, at least ideologically and culturally,
Towards
with
Russia.
Russia.
Yeah.
Now that's kind of what Putin has used as an excuse to get involved there. And you actually have to go all the way back to 2014. And I don't know if you remember whenever this happened, because it did make a lot of news. But back in 2014, Russian forces occupied what's called the Crimean Peninsula,
Mhm.
which is just to the south of Ukraine, or it is part of Ukraine, but it's in the very southern region along the Black Sea. And then there's also an area in the western part, or not western, the eastern part of Ukraine that was also heavily Russian
Yeah.
as far as the culture there. And in 2014, Putin sent in forces to occupy these regions. Now, he used this excuse, like these were people that were wanting to be part of Russia, and to a certain extent, they did. It's not a full on lie, okay, but
Yeah.
it's still part of Ukrainian sovereignty.
Mhm.
Okay, so this was Russia occupying sovereign parts of Ukraine. And again, there was a lot of outrage over this, but I guess the reason why there wasn't so much of a outrage at the time is because, again, those were technically Russian speaking territories. So there was a lot of sanctions that were placed on Russia. They used to be a part of an organization of other countries called the G8, which is just industrializing nations that all come together to have discussions about trade and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They were kicked out of that for invading Crimea at that point in time. So now it's called the G7.
Yeah.
But again, that there was just sanctions placed on them. There wasn't any kind of military response by NATO at that
Mhm.
point in time. And so that was almost his way of knowing that, that was almost his way of testing the waters.
Yeah. And say, will they do anything?
Yeah, exactly. So yes, there was a small response, and just mostly sanctions at the time, especially from the United States and other Western European countries, but not really any kind of other military response other than that. So he used all that information, knowing that there wasn't going to be much of a response to, in 2021, he started to build up a military presence just on the border of Ukraine, the border between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah.
And it's been since the early months of 2021 that there's slowly but steadily been an increase in military presence there. And I believe just before this real invasion took place, there was just over, I think, 190,000 military personnel that were staged at the border. Now, a lot of people, a lot of analysts out there and other politicians believe that this was just him, again, kind of testing the waters to see what kind of response there was going to be. But I really believe that nobody thought he was actually going to go through with this and launch a full-scale invasion of the country. Some other random history for you. This is the largest war that has taken place since the end of World War II.
Yeah.
So that just gives you some historical context. And whenever I say that, I'm talking European war. There has been other wars that have been far more devastating, but they've been elsewhere. But the fact that this is a European country declaring war on another European country, that hasn't happened since World War II. So this is very, there's a lot of ramifications for what's going on right now.
Yeah.
Stuff that even as a historian, I didn't see this coming.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, like, why now? Like, why do it now? Like, it could have been done years ago. And, we have the transition of power from the presidency from Trump to Biden in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost sounds like almost immediately after that election, he's like, let me start putting people at the border of Ukraine and see if I can get this back while Trump isn't. Because him and Trump had meetings and had relations while Trump was in office. And I mean, for the most part, it seemed to be pretty amicable for the most part.
Yeah.
I mean, as amicable as you can be with Putin, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I know there's probably many out there that would think that Trump and Putin were like best buds.
I wouldn't say that. I mean,
yeah,
they're rival leaders.
They're not. A lot of the language that Trump used probably didn't help his argument on that, but nonetheless, they're certainly not best buddies.
Yeah.
But the one thing that Trump did have going for him is that what he said, he usually backed up with action. And that's something that Obama and Biden now have not really had a whole lot of either opportunities or ways to back up a lot of what they're saying.
Yeah.
So I think that certainly plays a part of it. The other thing is in the Ukraine, they used pre-2014, they had a pro-Russian president that did have a lot of ties and connections with Russia and Putin.
Yeah.
And that was probably one of the reasons why Putin didn't do it at that point in time, because he believed that the Ukraine was moving closer to ties with Russia instead of further away.
Yeah.
But during that 2014 crisis that went on, that president, he was ousted, and this new president came in. New one that's currently in office.
Western
exactly
oriented.
Yes. So it's really been within these last few years that the opportunity for Putin to actually take some action has been available and logical, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So yeah, there certainly could have been opportunities for Russia to take over before this, but I guess not as many, not as good of excuses before this.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, from Putin's perspective, Ukraine is not currently a member of NATO.
Yes.
He doesn't have the opposition that he probably would have thought he would have had to this. At least at this point, anyway, he doesn't. Ukraine, relatively small, a lot smaller than Russia.
Yes.
He has the firepower. So he's tested the waters and nobody's done anything. Why not?
Yeah.
If that's his goal, is to reunite the Soviet Union and reform it, because he thinks that he can do it better, I guess. I mean, I'm sure that would be his thinking if you want to reunite something that has collapsed in the past.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess his thinking is, why not now? I've been in power for like 22 years. How much longer am I going to be in power? I mean, I don't know how old he is now.
He's
but
almost 70. So he's getting on up there in age. He doesn't look 70.
Yeah.
If you actually look at some pictures of him, he looks almost the same as he did whenever he took office.
I feel like that's just like a Russian thing, though.
Yeah.
Like when you look at people, like Russian people, most of the time they just don't age like the same way that we do a lot of the time.
Yep.
But yeah, no, I mean, from his perspective, like, why not now?
Yeah.
I mean, the U.S. isn't stepping in and opposing it and saying we're going to bomb Russia and send nukes and whatever else that we could potentially be doing.
Yeah.
And we'll help the Ukrainian a little bit, but they outnumber them like the whole country. Like if everyone brought arms for Ukraine, like everyone in the country, they would probably still outnumber them.
Yeah.
By a lot. So
yeah, the Russian military certainly has a lot more power than the Ukraine does.
Yeah.
But the one thing, and this is something that has been tried and tested throughout almost every conflict in the 20th and the 21st century, nothing will ever beat a determined people on their own territory. What this war is really going to be turning into is a guerrilla style conflict, and with the Ukrainians just doing the either sneak attacks or having the civilian population actually attack the Russian military. It's kind of like what happened in there's several examples of this. What happened to the United States in Vietnam?
Yeah.
What happened to the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan? Just having urban warfare against an ununiformed opposition.
Yeah.
I
mean, you've heard like horror stories of people going to Iraq and Afghanistan, and you can't even trust the civilian population. You'll have a small kid come up to you and they'll be strapped with a bomb or something. So
now I don't know what kind of extent that will be the case in Ukraine. I mean, you never know. I'm not going to put it past them, but the thing is, I don't believe Putin realized just how much opposition he was going to face whenever he went into Ukraine. I think he believed that by launching a full-scale invasion, that the government of Ukraine and also the military would just surrender right away because they are outgunned.
Yeah.
But that has not been the case. The Ukrainian military has put up a very staunch resistance, and now the civilian population is also being armed, and they are also putting up a ton of opposition as well.
Yeah.
This is kind of funny, but I was watching one of the news broadcasts. I can't remember if it was on Fox News or CNN, but they were showing images of the civilian population training.
Yeah.
And there was, young teenagers holding AK-47s. And they also had a zoomed in picture of this old granny that she looked like she was probably 70 years old with, traditional, it was a traditional looking Ukrainian woman, but she was also firing an AK-47 training to fight.
Wow.
So if that doesn't show the determination that these people have to resist Russian occupation, then I don't know what does.
Yeah, and I feel like that shows how that the civilian population feels about it. I mean, if you have a pro-Russian leader and he's leading the country in Ukraine and the people respect him and like his ideas and they're okay with living the Russian way.
Yeah,
you don't have this opposition.
Exactly.
But whatever has changed since that, which, I mean, with him to be ousted, I'm sure that was kind of the consensus of the population for the most part to begin with, was like, yeah, we don't agree with this. This is not how we want to live. And so now you've got, okay, well, that's being threatened again because we've had this leader in and everything's been fine and dandy for like 8 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And then here comes Putin back to try to take them back to their old ways, and they're like, we're not going to have any of it.
Yeah. And I mean, the Ukraine has always been, I don't want to say a trouble spot, at least in the Russian point of view, but they were kind of a reluctant member of the Soviet Union.
Oh, really?
The whole reason why they were part of the Soviet Union when they were is because Stalin, whenever he was in power, took them over. And the whole reason back then why the Soviet Union needed Ukraine is because of the food production that they had.
Yeah.
It is a very vital territory to hold on to. But one of the things that he did while Stalin was in power is he exported all this, grain and stuff to feed the rest of the Soviet Union, but he didn't really leave any behind for the Ukrainians to feed themselves. There's actually documented stuff that happened back in the 1930s, just before World War II, is there was millions of Ukrainians that starved to death.
Yeah.
But that was kind of Stalin's way of keeping his foot on them and making sure that they didn't leave.
Dang.
And again, it's hardcore, but that has left a lasting impact on how the Ukraine views Russia as a whole. So really, since that time, even though they were part of the Soviet Union all the way up until the early 90s, they haven't liked Russia.
Yeah.
They've always felt like the bullied little brother or something.
Yeah.
And now that they have been independent and have a taste of independence and what it's like and self-determination, they certainly do not want to be back under the rule of Russia.
Yeah. Yeah. And with Ukraine, you said being the breadbasket, they have lots of grain. They produce lots. How much of that across like Europe are they responsible for? Is
it's a lot. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's certainly, I would, even out of all the other countries combined, I still think it's a majority of the grain production in all of Europe.
Wow.
So it's a ton.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that they were saying on the news is, you can always expect gas prices to go up whenever a conflict like this happens. But they also said cereal is going to be going up in price.
Really?
Of all things. I think the United States still produces enough grain that we can be self-sufficient. But the fact that that is a worldwide traded commodity, you can expect the prices to go up on that kind of stuff as well. So, it just goes to show how, even though it's still a big country from a European standpoint, but from the perspective of the United States, where we have entire states that are bigger than most countries in Europe, that a small country like the Ukraine can have that dramatic of an impact on worldwide production.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy.
Dang. Yeah, that is crazy. It would be interesting to see how this plays out. I would assume the U.S. will probably feel the need to step in at some point, just because there has been so much call to action, I feel like. But I don't know how this ends well at this point.
That's what I'm thinking. I don't know. I really don't know, other than obviously Russia trying to incorporate the Ukraine back into their country, or at least in their sphere of influence.
Yeah.
I don't know what much else they have to gain from this.
Yeah.
Because they have isolated themselves so much with this one attack from the whole entire world. I mean, they only have a few other countries that they can, lean back on to trade with and have good relationships with that, don't really care.
Yeah. Well, and like I know Russia is like enormous.
Yes.
Like landmass wise, it is huge. But how much of like their own goods are they actually able to produce in Russia? Because I know a lot of it is very cold climate.
Yes.
Lots of snow. So a lot of it is not exactly the type of land that you would need to grow fruits or crops or even have as farmland, just because of the harsh conditions. I mean, there's only so much farmland you could use as
They
well.
they do still have lots of areas that they can produce things like that, but like you pointed out, them being so far north,
Yeah.
there's only so much stuff that they can produce themselves because, you know, even though they're the largest country on the planet, almost half of their land is unusable.
It's like
because it's-
Arctic. It's
yeah,
basically frozen year
so-
round.
You can't really grow nearly as much stuff there as you can in other countries that are a lot smaller and further south. I mean, the Ukraine is
Yeah.
a perfect example.
Yeah.
So the one thing that has kept Russia afloat so long, from a worldwide economic point of view, is their oil production. You know, I feel like Saudi Arabia and Venezuela and Kuwait, all these other countries that are famous for producing so much oil, they get all the notoriety.
Yeah.
But Russia, being as big as they are, they have almost, I can't remember exactly what percentage it is, but they have a ton of oil production, way more than even those countries, I believe. So that has been the big thing that has helped them economically throughout the 20th and 21st century.
It's
But
oil. Okay.
yeah, and exporting that oil to other European countries.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of these other European countries, like especially the Western ones like Germany,
Mhm.
France, Spain, places that do import Russian oil, they have cut off that oil import because of this conflict. So it'll be interesting to see just how much of a impact that ends up having on Russia, since now they're not going to be able to sell any of that to these countries that have been very dependent on Russian oil. It'll also be interesting to see how much of an impact that has on those Western European countries, because Germany, they import a majority of their oil from Russia, and now that they're imposing all these sanctions that are going to cut off that oil supply, what is Germany going to do to try and supplement that? A lot of people have said that it needs to be the United States that starts to do that, but we don't have a pipeline connected from the United States to Germany. We would have to send it all over on ships and
Which
things
takes
like that.
a long time.
Yes, and it's a lot
Jeez.
obviously less efficient, and
Yeah.
it costs a lot more money to ship it over there like that than, and it's only one ship at a time. So it's
Yeah.
not a steady pipeline. So there's a lot of unanswered questions that we still will have to see what's going to go on in the coming weeks,
Yeah.
and months, and possibly years, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, back to, I guess, how this last thing got started. I still don't understand what Russia's end game here is.
Yeah,
As
I mean,
far as what-
I would say Russia is one of the more unfriendly countries when you think about like world relations.
Yeah.
And now you're creating a war for gain of Ukraine or control of Ukraine, or that's the goal, I would
Yeah.
assume at this point. But you're also cutting yourself off from so many of the other relations that you could have with other countries on different continents, and I don't understand what they are planning to gain from this. I feel like they have a lot more to lose by starting a war against Ukraine than they do to actually gain in the end.
Yeah.
Especially if you have countries that you trade with like China or the US or most of the things that we get here, if they're not produced in the US, are produced in like China or Taiwan.
Yeah.
Most of the time, or India. I guess India too.
Yeah.
And I would assume that is probably the story for a lot of the world as well.
Yeah.
And so if you break those relations, I mean, you have to manufacture goods in Russia. You have to manufacture food in Russia. I mean, I guess they're already doing a lot of oil, but it doesn't make any sense to me why that you would focus so much on Ukraine when you could cut yourself off from the rest of the world, basically. So I don't know. I mean, I would assume because it has collapsed in the past that if he does try to reform a Soviet Union, there will be something similar because there's a reason that it didn't work the first time. Much like many other things do when people like socialism or whatever that, it always fails. Like it just is the story of how things go because it never is actually a good idea.
Yeah.
And it just seems like this war against Ukraine from Russia is one of those things.
And I think a lot of Russian citizens are realizing this.
I mean, they've had, we just finished Winter Olympics and stuff, and all this is going on. And I've seen Russian athletes are like, this is dumb. What are we doing?
This is one of the things that has been very beneficial about living in the social media age is, if this war was to happen back in like the 1970s, probably wouldn't have a whole lot of opposition from your average population because they're all being fed information from the state-sponsored media, which is still happening today.
Yeah.
But you didn't have the social media back then. So nowadays, you actually have people getting access to information from other places other than the Russian government. And I think a lot of the citizens of Russia realize that this is a war that is obviously not popular abroad.
Yeah.
And they realize that it's going to cut them off from access to so many different things. And
from goods to travel to all kinds of stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's only going to hurt the citizens of Russia. Not just the government, but again, the citizens.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I feel like a lot of times the leaders of the countries are more focused on what they want to do and how that they think they can better the country. And it's usually more on themselves rather than the entire country and its citizens, which is really what the country is. Like you are one person that has been elected most of the time, but it can be manipulated as we've seen. But I mean, you were elected to power. You are the mouthpiece for the citizens. But a lot of times that is not, and it happens in our own country as well. But a lot of times that is not how that the government is run. It is more of a let's elect someone and then we have an agenda that we're going to push. And if it hurts the citizens, oh well, doesn't matter. We got what we did. We wanted to get done.
Yeah. So the response by your average Russian citizen is really going to be it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. You have seen a lot of protests that have been going on within Russia, especially abroad, but in Russia too. And the state has been cracking down on these people pretty brutally.
The ones that are protesting?
Yes. Yeah. A lot of them have been arrested because they've outlawed public protests. Especially
is that like something that has just been enacted or is that something that goes back a ways?
I think that actually goes back a few years, but especially whenever it's citizens that are opposing a government sponsored war like this, that you're going to see more crackdowns on it.
Yeah. It's interesting to see that like the Russians are still able to access social media and things because I know there was a lot of outcry in the Olympics about one of the Chinese American athletes that was competing for China and she's on Instagram and things in Beijing and the people of China are like, why we can't access social media? We can't get on Instagram. Like, why are you special? And she's like, anyone can download a VPN, but she lives in the US. Like, I think she was actually born in like California. And so, I mean, Chinese people, a lot of times it doesn't seem like from that anyway. I was not aware of this to that extent, but literally don't really have access to social media if they're in China or it's like,
it's their
blocked
version.
Or their version.
Yeah. So still isolated.
Yeah.
I have seen it was just a headline that I saw earlier today is that Russia has blocked pretty much any kind of outside social media now that they see just how much of an impact it's having on their own citizens.
Which
But
is, it's something that when you learn about like different forms of government and things like coming up in school, like that's one of the things that's scary is like totalitarianism and the
Yeah.
things like that, where it's like, no, this is what we're doing. You have no say in it. And it doesn't matter whether you agree with it or not because we're doing it
Yeah.
anyway.
yeah, there's no First Amendment in Russia.
Yeah. Well, and even here, a lot of times it seems like it's being infringed upon. So,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, war is not fun for anyone, especially when when the citizens don't agree with it. Most of the world's powers do not agree with it, and then it's just not good.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem like it makes any sense.
Yeah,
So,
especially now that we live in the 21st century. You know,
21st
Back-
century.
back in the day, you could have countries that just bully others and
Yeah.
not really have much ramifications from it. Because, back in the 18th, 19th century, there was not nearly the global impact that a war like this could have.
Yeah.
Usually it was just two countries that didn't like each other or had some other kind of agenda,
Yeah.
and they would go to war with each other. And once it was over, that was it.
Yeah.
But now,
Well, and like back then, without all the social media and everyone being connected so easily,
Yeah.
I mean, you could start a war and attack before anyone even knew that was going on.
Yeah.
So you could have essentially, if you strategized it well enough, you could have attacked and won the war before anyone even knew about it.
yeah, and there's lots of wars back in the day that lasted, only a couple weeks.
Yeah.
In certain cases, like the Spanish-American War, that happened in 1898. It only lasted 10 weeks. So there
Yeah.
were entire wars that could be fought in a very short amount of time, and
Mhm.
again, not have any kind of outside interference in a lot of cases as well.
Yeah.
But now,
Now, I mean, we're here in the U.S. and we're seeing on like TikTok or Instagram or whatever, like giant guns trying to shoot planes down
Yeah.
in Ukraine, and this is like as it's happening, like a couple minutes later.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's crazy the
we're
speed of information that we have today.
we are getting a live look into what's happening.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating, but it's also really scary at the
Yeah.
same time. I mean, it shows just what war is like. I mean, one of the videos that I saw, and this was just on Facebook, is there was, I guess it was a Ukrainian, I don't know if it was a school or maybe it was just an apartment complex or something, but there was a Russian fighter jet that flew over and it shot missiles at a target right behind where they were, and you could see the plane firing its missiles, and the missiles went like right over where this video was being shot.
Oh
So
my gosh.
like, and this is stuff that, I mean, if it wasn't for social media,
You would never see
you would
that.
never see it.
Mm-mm.
So it's really fascinating, but really scary at the same time.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine living in a country that you literally have war on your doorstep.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of one of the things that we take for granted here in the United States. I mean, thankfully, we have a strong military that protects us.
Well, and almost nothing comes to us though.
Yeah.
We're always going somewhere else for war.
Yes. So the fact that we're seeing this kind of stuff and what a war can look like,
Yeah.
it's scary. But it's also time to be thankful if you live in a place like we do. So
Yeah.
really, really interesting stuff. Yeah.
I don't know that I got anything else.
Okay.
So
But yeah, I mean, this is only, I guess at the time that we're recording this, we're only like 3 days into this actual invasion. So
yeah, it's pretty early.
we'll have to see how everything
Yeah.
kind
Our
of plays out.
Our
but-
minisode turned into an hour podcast.
Once you get me rolling, man, if it has
I
anything
feel like
to
I
do
just
with
got a history lecture.
if you have anything to do with history, man, I can I can ramble on for a long time.
Well, and it's an interesting topic because, I mean, for the most part, when you look at it objectively, it doesn't make any sense of why this is going on, but
Yeah.
it is. I mean, it's happening right now as we speak. And so it's interesting to look at and see maybe why the intentions are there to go and do this.
Mhm.
And also just, I mean, we're not in Russia. We're not in Putin's inner circle. We don't know the workings of his mind and why he's doing the things he's doing. But I mean, I've heard that his goal is to reunite the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And so if he's getting up in his years, he probably wants to see that done before
Yeah.
he dies.
Yeah.
And
Before someone else is in
Yeah.
charge. You know, you always hear that Putin's some crazy guy, but
Yeah.
he's smart.
oh yeah.
He knows what he's doing.
Mhm.
He's a very calculating individual. So
I mean, like
there's-
he's been in power for 22 years. He could have done this at any point, and
Yeah.
he's just decided to do it now. So
yeah, so
it's probably been in the works for a number
oh yeah,
of years.
it does make you wonder how long has he had this plan?
Yeah.
And I would imagine it's been
a
a
while.
pretty long time.
Yeah.
So we'll just have to see how it all plays out. But we'll see, especially when it comes to how the United States will get involved. I mean, we are already kind of involved.
Yeah.
Just from NATO perspective, but we're not directly involved yet. So we'll have to see what kind of wider consequences this conflict has if
Yeah.
NATO does officially step in, because the Ukraine was a aspiring member to become part of NATO.
Was that like in the works and was set
It-
to be done, or
It wasn't. So I don't know all the exact qualifications that you have to become a NATO member. I know
Mhm.
you have to contribute a certain part of your military expenditures to support NATO, and then you also have to pledge that you're going to defend any other country that gets attacked and such and so forth. But
probably a lot more complicated than it seems?
it is a lot more complicated. So, but the Ukraine had expressed interest in joining NATO. I mean, as I know, their president was wanting to join in just the last few months. I
Yeah.
mean, if not, years before. I know
Yeah.
he's been expressing it a lot more recently, especially
Well,
since the Russians
yeah.
have been building up their military and now they've invaded.
Yeah.
But-
I mean, if it's been in the works for several years and you can see, okay, well, they're planning to attack any day now. Can we speed this process
Yeah.
up a little bit? Like, we want to be part of NATO. This has been in the works for a while. Can we speed this up and get
Yeah.
this moving along? Because it would be really nice to have NATO on our side whenever they decide they're going to attack, and it just didn't happen, I guess.
Yeah. And that makes you think, how did the Ukrainians feel about NATO at this point?
Yeah.
I mean, I know NATO is supporting them in an indirect way right now, but the fact that we didn't speed up that process and didn't allow them to join before it was too late.
Yeah.
I wonder how they feel about that. That's something that I don't know. We'll just have to see.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of wonder, is that a viewpoint from the Ukrainian citizens that's like, man, you guys really screwed us here?
yeah,
Or is it, well, it's a government thing and everything in the government takes freaking forever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe, especially when it's like, that's just within your own government. That's not even like internationally.
Yeah.
That takes even longer. So, I mean,
multi-government.
yeah. Yeah. So between all that, I mean, I don't know that you could say, you could look at NATO and say, man, like they really let us down, because I mean, NATO is supporting Ukraine in this war so far, and I would expect them to continue to do so.
Yeah.
But it is more indirect than it could have been.
Yeah.
So you kind of wonder, would that be a viewpoint of the citizens of like, man, screw NATO, we don't want to be part of them after this?
Yeah.
Or would it be like, okay, yeah, we really, really want to be part of it now?
Yeah. I think they're still going to be very supportive of NATO right now since the war is ongoing.
Yeah.
But if Ukraine is able to weather this conflict and emerge intact
Mhm.
in the aftermath of this war, I wonder what their point of view on NATO is going to be. But there's a lot of stuff that's going to go on between that time
Oh yeah.
that will change people's perspectives.
Yeah.
So we'll just have to see.
We will have to see how that it goes, because at this point it could go any which way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the Ukrainians are preparing for a very long-lasting conflict.
Oh really?
Because I don't, even if the government collapses, I don't think the citizens are going to be
Supportive
ones to give up.
Yeah.
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 So it'll just be something that may turn into a quagmire for the Russians.
A quagmire.
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, I mean, at this point, we're thankful that we are in the U.S. and we are in a free country and have the ability to sit here and talk about things like this while other people are enduring it. But this has been the mini-sode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you liked it, we would love to do more of these. Just let us know in the comments if you have any topics you'd like us to cover in another mini-sode or on a regular episode of Question at Hand. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.
Adios.